Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Dr. Lynn Robinson. Dr. Lynn Robinson has enjoyed academia as a professor of marketing and international business, as a department chairwoman, and as a director of an MBA program. She's enjoyed the world of business as a management consultant for small companies to very large international corporations, including hospitals and senior care organizations. She's been active in numerous nonprofit organizations, serving on the board of directors of many of them. In 1994, her book, Coming Out of Your Psychic Closet, How to Unlock Your Natural Intuitive Self, was published. Much of the stimulus for that book came from some of the creativity work she had done with university students and with business executives. It also came from recognizing many remarkably unusual events that had occurred in her own life. Now, 24 years later, Lynn has summoned her courage to write about a topic that can sometimes be controversial. For her, what has been plausible, healing, and uplifting may not be experienced that way by everyone. So in her new book, Loving to the End and On, A Guide to the Impossibly Possible, Lynn again uses her own personal experiences interwoven with research and the experiences of others to invite readers on end-of-life journeys that offer opportunity, challenges, fun, healing, and lots of love. Lynn, it's so great to have you on the show, and it's a subject that I'm so passionate about because in my work I see a lot of patients that come to me because they are right at the end of their life journey and they're trying to figure out what they can do to maybe turn that around, and for some people we can do that, and some people, we can't. But with that, I'm really excited to let people then have the hope and understanding that this is not the end. So
you know that I agree with you that it's not the end, but I also make the point in the book that if you happen to think it is, the book's a good read anyway because it opens you to the possibility of love however you perceive it. Even if you perceive that life does end, love does not have to end, period. It's always there.
Yeah,
but I am with you. I think that life continues in some manner, and we can, talk about all sorts of different manners. I think, however, that until we do that ourselves, we won't know for sure. Even those of us who have had near-death experiences, which I have not, though I have facilitated a group of NDEers for a long time, but I've had many out-of-body experiences that emulate that activity. So I simply can't deny my own reality, my own experience with the way the world has been for me. But I do recognize that everyone doesn't have those experiences and can still find joy in learning about the possibility.
And I'm curious because you had so many experiences where when you have the experience, it's undeniable. I mean, you can try to figure out science behind it, or maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But an experience is an experience. So I'm curious, what experience were there that drove you to write this book?
The love that I have felt through end times with so many family members now and so many friends who are no longer in their physical bodies, and with some of them I helped them through the transition, even if the transition took a couple of years. But I've also been bedside as they've made the transition from body to out of body, and it just felt important to me to write it. I've often laughed to some close friends, and now I guess I'm telling whoever's listening to this, but I almost feel as though my work here in this body at this time, in this place on this earth, could not be finished until I had the book published.
Oh, it was that important.
I sort of thought it was something I signed up to do.
Because when you have an individual, they lose a loved one, be
yes.
it mother, spouse, children, it feels like something is just ripped out of you. And that is your greatest fear to, one, I mean, losing your own life, but sometimes the greater fear is losing somebody that is close to you. What kind of hope, I mean, what can you tell them? What do they need to know as they go through this process and lost somebody?
Well, the first thing they need to know is I cannot take the hurt away. There is something about the physical that misses the physical. And I make that very clear to everybody. There just is. However, there is something deeper than that. If you try to describe why you love somebody, whether it's a close friend or your mate, it's very difficult to really explain or describe that. It's a feeling. It's not something you can, write down on paper and cut out and say, here, this is it. I mean, you can find words, but the words are simply representations of something deeper. You can paint a portrait, but the portrait that you're painting or the scenery that you're painting is just a representation of something deeper. So it's a matter of getting in touch with that deepness, that connection, and when the physical leaves, all of the stuff of that relationship is still yours. It doesn't go away. And if you're fortunate, as I feel I have been, and you pay attention to cues, you can sometimes be aware. I mean, for me, they're very dramatic and very physical, but for some people, for instance, whereas I might actually see someone who is departed in my bedroom at night, and I'll talk about that in a minute, others might wake up in the morning and see an indentation on the pillow and know they hadn't slept on that pillow, the one that their husband or wife or maid had used, and say, oh, my goodness, I mean, I thought I was dreaming that he or she was in the bed with me, but look, somebody's head was on the pillow. That has happened to a number of people I know. As to actually what I had said about frequently this happens at night, I think it's because in the daytime, the brainwave frequencies are more rapid usually when we're thinking and concentrating. If you measure it, the brainwave frequencies are different than when you're relaxed or meditating. And for whatever reason, and I can't tell you why, but for whatever reason, those who are no longer in physical bodies frequently find it easier to access us when we have more relaxed brainwave activity. That's the only physical part of it that I can talk about. I can talk about the emotional part of it, too. If you're not uptight and you're relaxed, it seems to occur more readily. I
think that's an important point, because a lot of people, they lose a loved one and they're not willing to let go of that relationship. And like you're saying, the physical body is gone, but the being still exists. The individual still exists in some fashion. And how can we, when we lose somebody, be in a space and an energy, in a situation where we can more easily pick up on these cues that you were talking about? And I assume these cues can be anything. I mean, you're able to sometimes see them physically in your room, but it can be things like a scent or wind or a bird, or it can be a lot of different things.
Oh, it can be almost anything, and odor is frequently part of that also. Sometimes, and while you were speaking, I remembered that a very dear childhood friend of mine who died made a deal with another of our childhood friends that once, and she knew she was dying for about the last year of her life, and she said, look, when you look down and you're thinking of me, and you're taking your daily walk, and you look down at the pavement or the grass or whatever you're walking on, you're going to find a coin. And that's been about 10 years ago, and I ran into this mutual friend recently in the grocery store or somewhere, and we were talking about our mutual friend, and we still miss her, and though she's been gone a long time, we miss the physical presence of her and her wonderful laugh and attitude towards life. And she told me the story about the coins, and she said, and do you know it is still happening? I don't think about it as frequently, she said, but when I do and I look down, whether it's a parking lot or the grass in my front yard or whatever, there's a coin. So, I mean, it can be something that seems to be as outrageous as that it could really happen that way. But the coin trick happened, I call it a trick for lack of something else. It's happened with a lot of people. I think sometimes it's simply being open. You mentioned birds. I've had a bird who visited and knocked on my window pane in my house, and this was in the last year or so, and I had never seen that kind of bird before, so I paid attention. Within a week or so, that bird had knocked, with his beak, had pecked on windows on 4 sides of my house and on 2 different levels of a 3-level house, and had even done that with my husband once. And I just thought, okay, somebody's talking to me. I've got to figure out who this is. And then the last time that he did that, he brought a female bird with him. How female birds are a little different shape and the colors are a little different in the same species. And she also knocked on the window. Well, I could make this a much longer story, but I had found out after the fact that one of my dearest friends, who was absolutely brilliant, could translate Greek, had a bunch of degrees, and was also a minister, had been a bird counter for a national study on birds, and I had not known that.
Oh. And
then the female was also a very good friend, and we were all friends as children. And when she died, in the last few times that she could say anything, she told her children that the birds had come to get her.
That's fascinating.
So my delightful takeaway from that was these were two friends who teamed up together to test me. You've seen people walking in your room, you've had people go talk to you, you've had all sorts of things happen, but we're going to try the bird trick.
See, you can figure this one out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it would have been just like them to be playful and fun and, turn it into a sort of a bird hunt, I guess, a friend hunt, whatever you want to say. So,
and that's what you notice. I would assume that is that the people, they don't lose their personality just because they move on. It's the same playful personality, same attitude, same all of that. Well,
whether it is sustained or not, certainly when they interact with you, they present the personality that you would identify.
Oh, I see.
They may expand beyond that. I doubt that anybody diminishes, but I would think that there might be an expansion beyond what you experience in your body. But certainly they're going to present to you in ways that you can recognize.
Wonderful. We're going to take a quick break. You're here listening to HealthMate Radio. I'm here with Dr. Lynn Robinson. Welcome back to HealthMate Radio. I'm here with Dr. Lynn Robinson, and we are talking about her wonderful book, Loving to the End and On, A Guide to the Impossibly Possible. But Lynn, in regards to, we were talking about near-death experiences, near-death awareness, after-death communication, and then you also brought up then out-of-body experiences. Can you describe these different, what they all are, and so people know? Sure.
We'll start with the near-death experience, which is getting more and more and more attention as more people in the medical community describe their own. But the near-death experience is a term that was coined, I guess, in the 60s to describe when a person who has lost signs physical signs that are used by the medical community of life, and what, the common term is flat lines. There's nothing there. There's no brain motion. There's no heart anymore, and so they're pronounced dead. But then, for some unknown reason, something starts up again, and they are not dead. And that's called the near-death experience. And NDEs have happened for as short a time as seconds or minutes to hours without real explanation of what that's all about. So a person who has had a near-death experience, and there are other people who have talked about maybe that should be called something else, but it doesn't matter. That's what it's called now. It's the near-death experience. And so a person who has had that can tell you about things that occurred and even talk to the physicians about what was going on if they were in surgery, for instance, of what happened during the surgery and who was where in the room, and there's stories even of someone who's had that experience saying, oh, by the way, there's something on top of the cabinet in the right-hand corner of the room that needs to be removed. Or, oh, by the way, I left the hospital and I was outside and there's a shoe on top of an awning on the other side of the building, and people will go and find the shoe or find the piece of equipment on top of the cabinet. And so those sorts of things happen. They also people who've had NDEs talk about loved ones that they see on the other side and so forth. So that's the near-death experience. You literally die according to the definitions we currently have in science, and then for some reason you resuscitate. The after-death communication is, as we were talking earlier, when you are able to communicate in some way, whether it's visually, audibly, olfactorily, whatever, with someone who is no longer in a physical body. And let's see, what were the other terms you wanted?
And then you have the nearing death awareness, which I...
Oh, nearing death awareness, yes. That's simply when you feel or know that you are in the process of moving from a body on. And you are able to talk about that and explain what's going on, if you still have speech left, and explain what's going on. And sometimes even then you see visitors come. So nurses, even more than physicians in hospitals, talk about patients who are talking to people in their room, and you'll ask them who's there, and they'll tell you, my uncle came to see me, and you'll say, oh, and how is your uncle? Well, he died 4 years ago, or whatever they may tell you, and that's nearing death awareness.
And then you also have, you mentioned out-of-body experience, because obviously that does not involve death, but that's still kind of a separation from the physical body, and you mentioned that you'd experienced that a number of times. Absolutely.
There's one of those that I described in the book in the chapter about my friend who didn't believe in any of this and who I visited in the hospital in the last few minutes of his life. And it was, I've forgotten, I can't remember now. I'd probably give the dates in the book, but it was at least 8 years after he died when I was aware in dream state that he had come to visit. And I left with him and went to what I call in the book metaphysical night school, because it was, we attended some sort of class that was quite metaphysical, and I couldn't remember anything about the class when I got back. But I had left, my body was in the bed asleep, but I was with this deceased friend on a journey. In my Psychic Closet book, I think I described doing that with my mother and taking a flying trip with her. I was seated cross-legged meditating on an overlook of a gorgeous area in Sedona, and was totally unaware of my surroundings, but realized I was flying somewhere with my mom, who had been deceased for several years. And it was absolutely glorious and wonderful. And when somebody said to me, Lynn, we need to leave now because it was starting to get dark and cold. And I came back into my body, became aware at that time that my body was cold, and also aware that there were tears just streaming down my face, tears of joy for the reunion with my mother. So those are two of my own examples. But the literature is filled with examples like that other people have. Does that help?
I mean, what an incredible experience. I mean,
absolutely, both of them.
Yeah, and going so with the out of body, and also we were talking a little bit earlier about being in a space where we can communicate with our loved one after they moved on. So and there you were in a relaxed state and meditating, and that helped you to facilitate that connection. Is that tend to be what is better, just to be at a calmer mind, meditation, and more towards evening? Is that kind of a better time, or is this just something that happens anyway? With
me, it's happened so much now that it's sort of spontaneous. I think everybody needs to find that out for themselves.
Yeah.
When I was meditating in Sedona, it wasn't to try to encourage that kind of experience. That was a total surprise to me. I was just, it's so glorious and so beautiful there that just sort of connecting with the universe and the beauty of the universe was all I had intended to do. But because I opened myself and was in a meditative state, nothing deep, I'm just relaxed, that did occur. But I think it could happen any time of the day. I think some people have it happen in the shower when they're just relaxed and playful. Some people do have it at night when they're asleep because they're relaxed, those that are open to it and remember it. But it doesn't have to happen like that at all. It can really happen any time, especially if you are alert to smells and sights and sounds. I don't remember which book it was in, but I think this latest one, Loving to the End, talking about the sister of a friend who was cleaning out her mother's house after the mother had died, and the mother had said, well, if I ever come back to communicate with you, I'm coming back as the cardinal that visits me every year in that tree out there. And while the sister was cleaning the house, which is certainly not being in a meditative state, she looked out at the tree and not only saw one cardinal, she saw about a dozen, which was very unusual. They never saw that many. And so she called her sister and said, well, Mom just checked in.
I love it. We're going to take a quick break. You're here with Dr. Lynn Robinson. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. You're listening to Health Made Radio. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. Lynn Robinson. She's the author of the book Loving to the End and On, A Guide to the Impossibly Possible. It's an amazing book. I read it. I loved every piece of it. And it's a book that gives hope, healing, and is just infused with showing that love continues no matter whether we are still alive here or not. So I'm really, when we're talking about the nearing death awareness, I was fascinated about how you're talking about the visions and the experiences that individuals have as they are moving through the process and moving on and onto their next stage in their existence. So with that, can you tell me a little bit more about what people experiences? I know you mentioned that they sometimes speak to people that have already gone ahead before them, and maybe they're there to help them during their transition. But what else? You talked about visions in your book that sometimes they see other things as well.
Yeah, sometimes it begins maybe a couple of years before people die, as they're opening to whatever expansion begins to come. And I do think there's an expansion that comes maybe not consciously. I remember years ago when my sister-in-law's grandmother was quite elderly, and she kept calling her up and saying, there's someone who's sitting in my room every night. That it's a very kind presence who just comes and sits in my room, but I don't know who it is, and this person isn't talking to me, but I'm very comforted. And finally, my sister-in-law said, "You're going to have to call Lynn. I can't talk to you about that, but maybe she can." And so she called, and we just talked about it. We talked about, obviously, it's someone who cares for you. Just relax, and if it doesn't feel threatening, enjoy that presence. And that happened a couple of years ahead. So it's just an example of opening to something greater than the physical reality that we have here. But I think most of the examples in the book are of people who are ill and begin being aware of families and friends and religious figures. One of the stories in the book I had read somewhere else. It wasn't something that happened with one of my friends, where a new nurse came in, and this gentleman was lying there, still a good person, still aware. And the nurse he stopped and talked to the nurse about what was going on, but then he said, You'll have to excuse me, they've come for me. And she said, "Really? And who are they?" Because she couldn't see anybody. And he takes his hand and waves to one part of the room, and he said, "Well, I've forgotten who it is now. The book will tell you, but we'll just say for the purpose now, this is my wife." And then he said, "And over there is our Lord and Savior." And he was a devout Christian. And the nurse left, and the man was really pleased that his loved one and his God were in the room with him. The nurse left to go enter some things on the computer at the nursing station. She came back 10 or 15 minutes later, and he had indeed gone. They had come for him.
What a wonderful transition. I mean, how can you wish for anything better?
Yeah, so that was his end-of-life vision.
Yeah.
But it can happen at various times. The first chapter I talk about one of my dearest friends. We were friends literally from birth, in the hospital together, in the nursery 2 days apart, and stayed friends our whole lives. And as she was dying, she was crying out, she unfortunately had a disease that caused a great deal of pain at the end, and they had a hard time getting the medications regulated to get rid of the pain. And she would call out to her mother and father, and it took her daughters and me a little while to realize that she was seeing them. And she'd say, "Come here, come here." And they were there comforting her. And her father came to me in a dream just before she died. I think it didn't occur to me to afterwards to try to reassure me that he was indeed there with her. He was a very quiet man.
Yeah.
So it was quite remarkable that he would have done that.
Yeah.
Come to me. But he obviously did.
Well,
that helped.
Yeah, I mean, when you have an individual, I guess if there's somebody like you that are willing to accept making the impossible possible, I mean, willing to be open and not limited by our own understanding, thinking that this is how the world works, but being open for the world to express itself as it truly is. And no matter what that is, allow it to do so without setting limitations. So you have an individual like you that are in that space, it's so much easier than for someone to communicate with you from another part of the existence, so to say.
Yeah, probably so. I would say getting through to me is probably like getting through to somebody who has full hearing as versus if you're calling on the phone or yelling across the room or whatever, it's probably easier with me than someone who's hard of hearing, if you want to use that analogy.
Absolutely. And with the near-death experiences, does it seem to be common trends as people, when they experience an NDE? I know people talk about the tunnel of light, and are there common trends that you know of that exist?
Well, you mentioned the tunnel of light, though. I've had only one who's been through a tunnel of darkness until he called out for some help, and once he did that, he was totally in the light. But yeah, they mostly talk about going toward the light, but not all of them do. And they usually see loved ones, whether they're friends or family. Those who have had animals with whom they felt very close often see the animals. With the near-death experience, they also often encounter someone, whether it's a loved one or a being they don't recognize, that says, you need to go back to your body. And they may get help doing that. Now, that doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to a lot of NDEers. So there does seem to be that commonality.
Yeah.
And also, most of them I talked to, and I've talked to a lot of them over the years now, think it was exhilarating, and it changes their lives. They usually return with more purpose and more empathy and caring for others.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. So there tends to be then that they're coming with some kind of a lesson or something that they've learned or that changed them through that experience. And what are some of the common themes in those experiences that when they come back, that this is what they feel is important to communicate?
Well, I think most of them communicate it's more important to love other people and be helpful than it is to focus totally on physicality and aggrandizement of things. So they're more into relationships and caring for others. That doesn't mean that they won't pursue a profound career, especially if that career can be helpful in accomplishing those other ends of getting people to be more loving to each other, getting people to be more caring about one another. They'll do that. But it's definitely a base of caring and love, and that there is something bigger than we are.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. Lynn Robinson. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. Lynn Robinson, and we are talking about loving beyond, meaning that when an individual that we adore and love and they leave us, that is not the end. The love continues, healing continues, communication continues. One of the stories that really touched me in your book was the story about your friend Bev, that while her husband was dying, and she was laying down there, and she was listening to her husband's heart, and as her husband was departing, can you relay that story?
Yes, it totally amazed her, because she did not believe that was going to be possible. I had gone to her house that morning. I had awakened feeling like I needed to go. He'd been very, very sick. And so that was when he said something to me that I didn't understand, so I went back to where she was, and this is all in the book. And that's what really got her attention, because I've told her what he had said, and he said he had some tidying up to do, and I had no idea what that meant. And she just pulled her head up and said, "What did he say?" And I repeated it. And she said he said that all the time. And I said, no, I never heard him say it. Well, anyway, long story short, that changed her whole attitude about what was going on. She was feeling better. I left and went to visit someone else. So I was not there when he died. But she called. Well, first her daughter called, and she was a nurse, and told me, and left all these messages, because I wasn't here, that he had died. And then I had a call from my friend saying that she said, "Well, you killed my husband," and just laughed. because then she was exhilarated, and I didn't understand it in that moment. And then the daughter called again, left another message about that, and said, "You really need to call. We have this incredible story to tell you." So I did, and the story was that as he was dying, and there are physical signs that you can see, the modeling of the extremities as the blood doesn't flow, and so there's physical things besides breath that you can notice. And so all the nurses there were noticing that. They knew that he had begun to actively die, and that means that death is imminent, probably a few minutes. So they went in, and the daughter, the nurse, had her head on the chest and could hear the heart, and she also had begun saying a prayer and said, "Mom, don't you want to put your head on his heart and hear his heart as he leaves?" And when she put her head down and could hear that, when he left his body, she knew it. When he, meaning the spirit of who he was, the essence of him, however that can be expressed. This is where words just really don't make it for me or most people. But as he was leaving, the essence of who he was, she left with him. She said, "I knew I was with him, and it was like an experience that I have never known, and it was glorious and gorgeous. It was just unreal." But obviously, he continued, and she was still alive in a physical body, and there was at some point she was no longer with him. But until her own death, that to her was the most exhilarating. She laughed at me one time. She said, "I don't really know how to explain it to you, but I can tell you this: it's better than sex."
How can you get closer than that? We don't even have a physical body separating you.
It was just amazing. It really did change her life, and she after that was a neighbor called and wanted her to come meditate with her, and she said, "So I did it." She was so cute when she called me. "So, Lynn, I did that. I would never have done that before." And it was amazing, and it was very helpful to me because it was calming, and it was very helpful and loving to her, and she was so appreciative. Just little things like that. I mean, that's just an example of a change in her life from having that experience with her husband. And I would assume that probably has some similarities to what happens to people who have a near-death experience, except she had a shared death experience. And I haven't talked to a whole lot of people who have had those.
Yeah, that's why it really touched me. I mean, you have people that have already departed that then guide the individual as they are moving through, going through their transition. But then to have somebody that your wife that's still living to get to be part of that transition on that level, I think it's just incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really touched me when I read that story. With all the experiences that you've had and all the people that you've communicated about in this area, if you would describe what lies beyond this life, how would you describe it? What would it look like?
Well, for me, it's a lot of openness and brightness, but not glaringness. If you can, a brightness that is exhilarating and uplifting, and a clarity, but it's more than what it would look like. For me, it's also what it would feel like. And as I even talk about that, the heart area, which where a lot of these feelings enter, they don't all enter in the head. All the knowing doesn't enter in the head. It's an expansion that is very rich and luscious and warm and both enveloping and outgoing. It's inclusive. It's Well, I would equate that with what you feel when you're in your body and you just love someone, you're with someone you love so much that you feel bigger and better than life itself. It's hard to put in words because words confine us, and it's an expansive feeling that isn't subject to being confined.
Yeah, then we always look at we're so used to in the physical world that I'm here, you are there. I'm in this city, you're in that city. So we always look at that separation. But then, we talk about things like quantum physics, and you recognize that there really is no separation, that everything exists here and now. So with that, then the limitation to communicate with a loved one when they have moved, gone through the transition, it's really not a separation of space in any way.
No, it isn't. And as you're saying that, I can feel that you have had the experience yourself.
Yeah, life always is interesting. Yeah. No.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
there is. Well, words and physicality are limiting, and it is more limitless what we're trying to describe.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to do that. So I would encourage all of your listeners to relax and allow and have the experience themselves. Dream about a loved one and just relax and see if the dream expands in ways that perhaps they won't expect, and to appreciate that. And, another part of my book is there are a lot of references for kinds of books that you can read if you want to learn a little bit more or hear more stories from the written page. There are also movies that are listed that you can look at if you're more inclined to do something like that, and some online references that may expand these things. But, for all of the people who listen to you and are very gracious to listen to what I have to say too, just allow yourself to have it, to let it happen. Just relax. Think about someone you love, and think about them with so much love and so much expansion of that love and so much openness of your own love that perhaps you will feel, see, hear, smell some of that love coming back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I love stories of some of my friends who, in thinking about or knowing of, someone who is no longer in a physical body, and they'll smell the person's aftershave or favorite perfume, just get a whiff of it and say, "Oh, hi, I'm glad you dropped in." And that may be all they get, but that's great in itself. Just that little sniff or whisper or touch that can happen. And we just have to be grateful for what we do get. And if you accept it, then more may become available.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dr. Lynn, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and for bringing so much hope and love and healing to people that have gone through some of the toughest time, losing somebody that they love. And I really urge all the listeners to get Dr. Lynn Robinson's book, Loving to the End and On, A Guide to the Impossibly Possible. It's truly a book of hope. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Michael, thank you.